a story about a young black woman who's walking home from church, and a carload of white boys drives up, kidnaps her, takes her out to the forest, abuses her, and attacks her and assaults her, and then drops her back off where they picked her up from, and then that's that. The police come to investigate this, and they immediately know who the group of white boys were. Instead of arresting the white boys, they send representatives of the white community to this woman and her husband and say, we'll give you $500 if you just will shut up about this and let it be. I guess there were some white boys in there that were notable. The husband said, hell no, we want justice. And they looked at him and they said, nigga, exact words, nigga, what do you think that nigga is worth? Talking about his wife. You think she's worth more than $500? Right, type of thing. Of course, he kept pushing it. They made phone calls to the NAACP, and the person who picked up the phone was Rosa Parks. And the reason she picked up the phone was she was the NAACP's chief investigator of sexual assaults that were happening against black women across the American South. So whereas someone over here was keeping track of the lynchings of black men, someone over here was keeping track of the large number of white-on-black sexual assaults against black women across the American South. And that was before the other issues that they took up. This was a primary issue, and the person who was the chief investigator keeping all of the records on that was Rosa Parks. And the way that we know about how many sexual assaults there were across the South is because of people like Rosa Parks. So in the context of February, we can talk about her as somebody who didn't sit down because she was tired. In the context of March, Women's History Month, we better pull her up as one of the people that was educated and disciplined and organized and an investigator of a system of things that were happening that people didn't even know. They knew it, but they just didn't have the records to prove how many of these were happening.
It is Freedom Friday, and you are still not free.
This is the beginning of Black History Month Part 2. And the reason I'm calling that is March is Women's History Month. And what's going to happen this month is something that happens similarly in Black History Month. What's going to happen is the same cast of characters are going to get trotted out. People like Susan B. Anthony and others, possibly Phyllis Wheatley maybe, or somebody like that. And it's going to be a hollow celebration that doesn't do anything to educate us or move us any further than what we already know. So that's not what we do at Freedom Friday. What we do at Freedom Friday is we try to turn everything into a lesson and into a teachable moment, because we are lucky enough to be in a network of educators, and that's what these people do every day. I just spent week with you, some time with you, Sharif, and others again. And every time we're in a room not just with black educators, but with people of note, people who are doing things, from people who are storied and have done a lot to people who are emerging, and you better look out for them because they are doing like amazing work. We were on stage this last weekend with Morehouse Men, young brothers who are so impressive. Just when you meet them, they just drip of excellence and you see it. And we were also in the room with a Dr. Nina Gilbert, who is this bright star in the constellation of Black education leaders, voices, builders, whatever you want to call them. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk a little bit about Women's History Month in light of the Black women educators who, if it weren't for them, we would have no education. We would have no tradition or heritage of educating young Black men. The young Black mind, period, would be in real trouble if it wasn't from some of the notable names in history that we can all name. Not we can all name. Some of us can name some of them. Some of us can name more of them. And that's what I want to talk about today, Sharif. I want to just talk about Women's History Month in light of the long tradition of Black women educators. That we as brothers, and people would ask, well, you two men talking about this. Yes, because Black men should be talking about this. This is what black men should be admitting. If we're going to have any voice, any platform at all, we should be using it to remind people of people like Lucy Craft Laney, Mary McLeod Bethune, and we could keep going on and on and on. We just heard some new names. I heard new names in some of the work of Dr. Jarvis Givens this week. His book that he has out right now, we're going to bring him on. He's going to talk to us about it. But I was amazed by the number of names and historical documents he had of people I hadn't heard of, and I thought I've heard of a lot of people, right? So, Sharif, what do you think about that framing, just to start it out with? It's Women's History Month, but you lead the Center for Black Educator Development. I can name people everybody in CBED, in Center for Black Educator Development, that I have met is powerful in one way or another. Kelly Seaton, just bright. Like it just drips off of her, right? People who work for you who aren't necessarily classroom educators right now. Mimi is amazing. You just have this collection, bro. You do good work, but if you didn't have Black women,
bro, listen, and I take that right from the very early. I mean, obviously, Mama Aisha Meki, without her, I know, I just know, God.
You know what? Let's stop right there. Say something. That is a good place for us to start. Let's talk about your mom for a minute. Bring her name into the room and bring the example that made you what you are. That comes from her.
Yeah. All right. Didn't know we were going to go there, so I got to gather myself, man.
And it's okay. Take a moment. Yeah. This isn't a white supremacist show. We do things on our own time. Yeah. And I just told you before we started, I can name women in my life that gave me life at different points when it was really important, where I was feeling less than I could possibly be. And if it wasn't for them actually kind of anointing me in the moment of, you better remember who you are. You better stand up and be what God intended you to be. If it wasn't for that message coming from aunties and my mother and other people along the way, man, how lost would I be right now? Just within the last month, if I look at my calendar, it is full of Black women who are keeping me alive right now, right? So anyways, I'm sorry. If you don't want to go there yet.
I can't. I needed that time just to, choke down some tears and everything, man. It's just rough when, when someone like her is not in your life anymore, but in the physical sense. But, I the first thing I think about, when you brought her up is, even on her deathbed, she was cheering us on. We were still doing Freedom Friday. I had taken a break from it, because she was in hospice. And I remember one time you guys called in, you called me on the phone, and she was, after, I told them, oh, this is the brothers, she was like, listen, tell them to keep going. She was like, tell them to keep teaching, keep pushing, she was about as frail as she could be. She was like, keep going, with all the, power she could muster in her voice and hand as she gestured. That's like one of my, just, even at the time, she was understanding, okay, the work, the conversation, the teaching, because she looked at a lot of things as like teaching, and Mama Toy always uses this quote that she would hear her say a lot, if you want peace, fight for justice, because justice will surely give birth to peace. And so her centering justice, she was like, that's the work. And so if you're about that, she was about you, and even from just a young child, that's, and not just us, she was like this, she was a community teacher and the classically trained teacher, somebody who joined the Black Panther parties because she saw them feeding Black children. And initially didn't even believe that. She was like, okay, but is this for a show? Are y'all just doing this? So she popped up a couple more times just to make sure it wasn't a one-off and they were just, grandstand, oh yeah, we do this, but not really doing it. Is it healthy food? Is it consistent? Are y'all delivering on the promises you made? And when she saw that, she's like, oh, sign me up. Y'all are about the people, but I think it started when she was young, for her, as a 16-year-old being dragged off a public transportation by 6 police officers, and this is the craziness. People sometimes don't understand, we see overseas and how police act. We're like, oh my gosh, but we know it inherently, personally, how these things go down, man. The police had the bus driver they took everybody else off the bus and used the bus as the police wagon and had the bus driver drive to the police station. So imagine you're on the bus, you're just trying to get to work. They're like, no, all of y'all have to get off. We're taking her on this bus to the police station. Like that kind of just like craziness, you know, and then after the Panthers, you know, going to Temple University because she was first going to community college. She was first graduating in the first graduating class from Community College of Philadelphia. Shout out to CCP. Then going to Temple, becoming a teacher, you know, in a very similar program. It was just like, hey, you know, kind of become a teacher. I forget the name of it. It was like, you know, something like Teach for America, but at Temple. Joined that and just continued that you know, that work in that way. So yeah, I mean, but as you said, like where I would be, I mean, Mama Fasaha, you know, you interviewed her before, founder Nathamo Sasa, that I talk about all the time. My mother said that was one of the best decisions in her life, was putting us in that school, and she was right. Like I know it, and it was full of, you know, we had some brothers obviously, but it was full of Black women who were just amazing, you know, amazing. Fasaha, you know, similarly, she wrote a book. In fact, it's the yellow books on the top shelf up there, where it talks about Black women in Philadelphia. Man, this joint is like 600 pages, and she was like, she still couldn't put everybody in there, you know, just Black, Black women in Philadelphia, and the title of the book is "They Carried Us." That's how I feel. "They Carried Us" is such an appropriate title. At least in my life. Yvonne Savior, who taught me how to teach. Like I knew I wanted to be an actor. I knew, like, you know, after Dr. Martin Ryder invited me in, I knew, like, all right, this is what I want to do. But Mama Cynthia actually introduced me to the idea of teaching. So let me shout her out. Cynthia Moultrie told me to go to the meeting. I was like, I don't want to go, but you listen to your mamas. I knew I better at least go to the meeting because Mama Cynthia took the time to say, I think you should go. Ended up there. Yvonne Savior really had me fall in love with pedagogy. Really had me fall in love with like the art and the science of teaching and how it was connected to liberatory efforts. Right. So even now, like, that's why I'm like, I get impatient with the like, yo, are they teaching? Can they read? And what are the teaching skills that teachers have to help unlock a child's potential, you know, like, so all those folks, you know, and then you fast forward to, you know, here at the center, like the women in this organization, man, are phenomenal.
Amazing. I mean, and humbly so, right? They're not searching for the spotlight all the time. They're not seeking out the accolades necessarily. And the only reason I'm saying that, not like anybody else does, but the reason I'm saying that is the story you just told about your mother, the story that we could tell about the Black women educators, is that in really bitter circumstances and bitter times, they didn't use it as an opportunity to become bitter. They used it as an opportunity to turn something into turn nothing into something, right? So if I'm going to be in struggle, if I'm going to be struggling, you know, we think about, like I mentioned Lucy Craft Laney. If I'm going to be living in a world where we're still living in all the oppressive times, I'm going to teach. I'm going to make sure that the next generation. Lucy Craft Laney never had any children of her own. She got a charter from the state of Georgia to start the first Black kindergarten in the state of Georgia, and that was going to be her thing. And I like to tell people, because this was the 1800s, I like to tell people this was the first charter school because she got a charter from the state of Georgia to run a school separate from the school systems, so that she could create a kindergarten to provide an early education opportunity for Black folks that didn't have it, because she knew herself she was gifted. I think she was reading more than one language as a young person. She was reading early, like 4 years old or something like that. Really important things she was reading, and she was just gifted. And she knew that early education was going to be her thing to make sure that we got kids a good start. And that's how you got the very first Lucy Craft Laney School in Georgia, which, by the way, the Lucy Craft Laney School survived all the way until the 1980s. The thing that I think really disrupted its legacy was integration, and it became a magnet school or something like that, and some other things happened, whatever. But Lucy Craft Laney, one of her students was Mary McLeod Bethune. I think people know who that is, right? This is one of her students. This is one of Lucy Craft Laney's students. There's a story about Lucy, the way she got her money. She had to deal with philanthropy the way we did, too. She took a bus or a train to Minnesota from the South with no rest, no sleep, went straight into a meeting with philanthropists and got right on the bus to come back home, had no sleep for like 24, 48 hours, something like that, and they didn't give her any money. But she made such an impression that one of the wives of one of the philanthropists sent her a $10,000 check. $10,000 in 1800s was a lot of money. Yeah. So her charter school that she had from, with the charter from the state of Georgia, is what gave birth to creating her own environment for us to learn at an early age to create something that hadn't existed there, Black kindergarten, which became Black first grade and second grade and third grade. She started with just a handful of students, and when word got out, she actually came to work one day and had something like 150 people like waiting to be educated. She started with like 8, right? Yeah. And word got out, and all of a sudden she's like, I have a problem here. I have to start a system because I have too many people here to teach. And not all of them were kids, by the way. Yeah. Not all of them were kids.
Yeah. No, I mean, and that, I think when, one of my teachers, Baba Chang, would always say, like, you can sometimes tell your teacher through your student, and sometimes teachers are known through their student. You might not hear about the teacher, but you hear about their student. And then, you're just like, I got to understand this genealogy. What's the cultural, intellectual genealogy? Then you're like, oh. And I would say, like, for so many of us, like, if we trace our cultural, intellectual, spiritual genealogy, that those tributaries will often be these giants, these giant women who were just like, had this vision and was just like, yep, this is how I'm pouring into, and it's like a river, right? Like that tributary leads to something else, But like, if you keep tracing it back, if it's the Nile, you keep going down south, you'll see like, a constellation, as you said, of these Black women legends, but often not loud legends. Like, you might not hear their name in or see it in print or things like that, but the people know, like, just the gravitational force that they wielded,
if we really wanted, you said genealogy. So if you wanted to go all the way back, we would have to have a long seminar on just the educational practices of Africa pre-colonial period. And we'd have to put some stakes in the ground that people don't know about, right? And we're not doing that. That's not the scope of today, what we're talking about, but it is the scope of Black education. We have to stop pretending like we don't have a heritage, a lineage that goes beyond what we've been told about ourselves from other people. But if we're starting in the United States, there were some early practices in Dr. Jarvis Given's work that he has out right now. I encourage people to go check out his recent book, because he's got lots of primary resources in there that give voice to periods that we don't remember. And before there was necessarily a written curriculum history that our Black educators were participating in, there were different ways of passing on knowledge, right? There was a carrying over from generation to generation of folks that maybe before they could write, they could talk. And in talking and in music and in rhythms, they were able to communicate things from grandmother to grandson, right? Grandchild. And then when reading came along, the acquisition of literacy by African Americans, by Black folks, by Africans in the United States, the acquisition of reading and literacy is a phenomenon of history. It's the fastest acquisition of literacy in human history, right? Very short amount of time, an entire population of folks under trees and in churches and in ditches and in private places because they had to hide the fact that they were trying to learn to read. And at the head of all those places, there were Black women actually doing the teaching of the reading, right? if you look at the people who were reading first. So if we talked about periods, there would be the antebellum period first. We would talk about that, and that's a resistance period of education. That's learning to be resistant. That's learning for the purposes of liberating and becoming free in a way that we don't remember today. Andrea Williams has a book called Self-Taught, and I would just put that on the table for people to go check out. That book is dope. Have you read that book, Sharif?
I have. And anybody who knows her, I've been trying to reach her for quite some time.
Have you really?
Yeah.
That book opened my eyes to a lot of stuff I didn't know. It's so well resourced, by the way. She did what Dr. Givens is doing now. She went to primary documents. She looked through years and years and years of Black educators talking themselves and revealing themselves what they did.
Yeah, I think somebody told me she's from Philly. I don't know, but
see, you like to say everybody.
I wouldn't be
Philly.
surprised.
See, everybody's from Philly.
I wouldn't have wait till you gave her accolades. It was like, yeah, she's from Philly.
Well, if she's from Philly, how have you not been able to?
Because I don't think she's here now. I think
Okay.
she was like, started here when she was younger, or when she was first professor or something. But yeah. I need to follow up with Greg Carr. He's like, oh yeah, I can, blah, blah, blah. But I need
Dr.
to follow
Carr.
up with him. Yeah.
You got to ask Dr. Carr more than once. One of the things I took away from that book was the idea that that learning has to be stolen sometimes. Like the system isn't set up for you to be taught and for you to learn. So her book, Self-Taught, talks about all the ways that that Black educators and Black education practitioners of any sort, aunties, grandmothers, uncles, whatever, had to be kind of subversive in teaching themselves to read, to understand. And it had to be for the purpose of understanding the world that you live in so you can become free. It wasn't just because you want to read. It wasn't just because you want to know the alphabet or you want to read
just
Plato or some other boring stuff.
What they call it, pleasure reading or something. I forget what they, like the beach
leisure.
reading,
It's not because you want a life
reading,
of leisure. Like, I'm going to sit around and read Aristotle. Bore myself to death. No, it was because I need to read the Constitution. I need to understand how the court systems work. I need to devise strategies that free me. So the antebellum period, I would lead people to her for that period. And then in Reconstruction, man, this is a different period because during Reconstruction is the genesis of public education period. And in that area, you have Charlotte Fortin Grimke. And her thing was academic rigor. Like proving that we not just could learn, but we could compete. That we could have academic rigor and acquire the basics, the basic levels of things. And it takes a great deal of belief in a people to even foster a thought like that during the time of Reconstruction. Now let's just talk quickly about Reconstruction.
And she was you should also just say she was definitely from Philly.
No, she wasn't.
Yeah. The Fortins
really?
are like Philly famous. Yeah, the Fortins.
Oh, Jesus.
Oh, yeah.
Good Lord. I'm about to look up some New Orleans people. Now.
Oh, they definitely out there. There.
Well, you know what? They probably came from New Orleans before they came to Philly. Because, Philly, people came from the South. Let's just remember that, Folks moved north from the South.
Except for the poets. I mean, she was born in like 1830, so this was before the
the Great Migration.
Well,
no, because
100 years earlier,
where do you think people were running away from? Running to.
No doubt.
They were trying to get to New York.
That's how my grandma got up here from South Carolina. So yeah.
So what do you know about her? What do you know about her contribution?
Well, I know that one, she was. So this was even before Reconstruction, right? Because she was also an abolitionist, and I know that she was a teacher, she was an educator, and I don't know a ton about her. I know we wrote about her, but they said that they were using a lot of her work for school to create more schools, right? Like, as you said, they were using her thought processes, and the Fortins in general, like they were very involved with a whole lot of stuff, you got James Fortin, so they were supporting the early Black churches. They were supporting the Civil War movement. They were, businessmen and philanthropists, and they had some funds, and so they were, when you're talking about like people who were black and early in that time that were still able to amass some money. I think her husband or her father was in the shipbuilding or something like that. But anyway, they had money, and they were like some of the early philanthropists who were supporting different movements. I think Philly had like the Philadelphia Anti-Slavery and the Philadelphia, Committee or Coalition. They had the Vigilance Committee, Philadelphia Vigilance Committee. So she was a part of a lot of those different, organizations. So,
The thing that I find interesting about
pull
her
up what
and
we
the others.
wrote on Philly 7th Ward, because I know she was one of the highlights.
Philly. Thing I find so interesting in history is that you had the American missionary period where American missionary folks were sending white women down to the South to teach. And it was very much in missionary fashion. Let's go down and educate those folks down there. And it's not to throw any heat or shade on them, because that actually, we wanted that to happen. We wanted people to come from somewhere else to demand that black people have schools and get an education. But even within coming to provide aid and support, they also brought paternalism with them, like racial paternalism with them. And it was the interaction between the black women educators and the white missionary educators that there was some negotiation to be able to happen, where the black women were able to keep us academically safe from the paternalism of the missionary teachers, right? The teachers who were dropping in saying, we need to help you savage Negroes learn something. And if it were not for educated black women being able to translate all that nonsense into something for us, we would not have come out culturally affirmed out of that period. So that's Reconstruction era, and Charlotte Fortin is a key figure in that era, specifically in the development of public schooling, and making sure that we were not just ready to learn, but we were ready for academic rigor. This is the first, I think, development of the idea of black excellence during this time. And then we get into the Jim Crow time. So that's where Mary McLeod Bethune comes into play, Jim Crow era. And her thing, I think, was institution building. So she came out of Lucy Craft Laney. She got to see on a small scale of what you can do with a small environment, a charter environment. But her thing was she's looking at the Booker T's of the world. She's seeing the development of real institutions that can train, and not just train students, but train a system of the teachers of students, right? Like, she went upstream. She's like, let's put out some people who can teach. What do you know about Mary McLeod that you think is important for folks to know?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much with her. But, in addition to the school, one, people, imagine you're teaching, you have your school, and then people showing up while you're there to burn it down. Right? Like, so we know about the thousands of black schools that were being built, and many of them were being burnt down as they were being built, right? Like, black schools and black churches, in addition to our homes, they were being firebombed, right? So that was a big part of it. And she's there standing defiantly, and so they didn't end up doing it, but, just the courage of Mary McLeod Bethune, to do that. But then just also like her work with people like W.B. Du Bois, people, sometimes we hear these names and sometimes we forget how closely they all work together. Their letters to each other, the debates and arguments and fights that they had. But at the same time, they're like, all right, this is, we got different strategies, but black liberation is what we want, and so when you think about just her work in that kind of space, whether it's the founding of the NAACP or, other places, like, she was a pivotal person, so much so that who was the president at that time was just like, oh, let me get her advice about, like, what's happening. But, her insistence on school and, back to like rigor and the level and the bar. So when you think about like Mary Church Terrell and Terrell, was it Mary Terrell? Mary Church Terrell? when I think it was the League of Negro Women or something. They started an organization, right? Like, and so I think Mary was one of the founders, and then she was the president. Then she rolled off, or Mary Church Terrell was the president, and then she rolled off, and then Mary McLeod Bethune. Just imagine like the leadership that they had, that they used to advance our folks.
I actually should look this up because, I've written about this and I know about this. There was 4 Black educators that were in touch with each other, Black women
Oh
educators.
yeah, you put me on that. The Forgotten
So,
Sisterhood, right? You got Mary Church or Lucy Craft Laney being the matriarchs, Nanny Helen Burroughs.
and what's so interesting for educators listening and watching, a lesson on this, these 4 Black women writing letters to each other as Black educators. The interesting thing about them is they were coming from different perspectives too. There was one that was definitely more in the respectability camp. There was one that was more in the manual education, learning basic skills camp. One that was more in the academic rigor. So it's interesting to not make people a flattened monolith, to see the vibrance of Black education in them, see them as like tending to a garden, because they didn't have all the same ideas. I think it was called We Specialize in the Wholly Impossible. I'm trying to look it up here. It's associated with Black women educators and school founders like Nanny Helen Burroughs and Mary McLeod Bethune, who overcame severe racial and gender barriers to establish institutions for Black girls. And they were involved in, correspondence across state lines, across like lines of class and difference. And, like you mentioned, Mary McLeod Bethune became somebody who made it to the White House, was brought in to talk to people at a very high level about what needed to happen, in the shadow, by the way, of men and Black men who took a lot of the credit for what was going on in the world, but the actual work was being done by these folks. There is a book, it's called We Specialize in the Wholly Impossible, and I would get people to take a look at that, and because it goes deeper. Like, it's kind of like the Black History thing where we can all name Malcolm X, we can all name Dr. King, we can all name, well, some of us can name, Stokely Carmichael, who became Kwame Ture, and whatever. But then we forget a whole bunch of other names. So I just want to bring quickly some names that I made a list for myself. I'm not going to go in this too deeply, actually. I would just tell people, educators, this is the month, this is March. Think about putting some people on the table that normal people, and by normal people, I mean civilians, education civilians, wouldn't be sitting around reading all the time, because a lot of our history gets lost to the invisibility factor of our key people, right? And I'll just say, let me say this, Sharif, so we're talking about all these people from the 1800s and early 1900s, and then there becomes this part of our history where you don't hear from anybody else anymore. Like, you get to Marva Collins in the 70s, and you have to ask yourself, well, damn, what happened in the 60s and the 50s and the 40s and the 30s? Because, we talk about 1800s, and then all of a sudden Marva Collins pops up in Chicago.
I mean, that's so important, and that time period, like, it's a ongoing link, right? And again, this is why the genealogy, is so important, right? Like, this is ongoing. And I would say, and I love that you're raising people, and don't just raise up the names, educators or community as you're listening, so like Mary McLeod Bethune, like, we know Bethune-Cookman, that's part of her legacy. We know her work at the NAACP, she's part of the Black Cabinet at the White House. But read her last will and testament. Introduce the last will and testament. English teachers, English teachers, matter of fact, like, there's so many, we're like, you have to study prose anyway. You have to study syntax anyway, right? So use the speeches and the letters of, these Black women this month as part of your lesson. You already have like the standards, and they're easily applicable to them. If you're if you're studying persuasive essays and you're teaching kids persuasive essays, use Mary McLeod Bethune's last will and testament. And what she talks about, this is what I leave to my people. I'm around 80 years old now, and so I'm not as active as I was, but here is what I'm telling you to do. Because it reminded me what Aisha Al-Mekki left us. She said, here's what I'm telling you to do. You keep fighting for justice. You keep talking about justice. You keep pushing. Mary McLeod Bethune did that 100 years ago. And then that time period in between, so you're talking about Black History, we're ending Black History Month, but people understanding that Mary Church Terrell had already started Frederick Douglass Week, right? Or day, or like she was celebrating that, and Carter G. Woodson said, oh yeah, I'm going to build off what this Black woman started and create this week. So maybe she had Frederick Douglass Day, but like people in schools and around the community, around the country were celebrating Frederick Douglass Day, right? So that was the seed that now we have Black History Month. But the seed was Mary Church Terrell, which, would say, the thing that I love is like lift as we climb, because I think that's at the end of the day, as they carried us, they were lifting as they climbed.
Some names to bring into the room. First of all, that's dope history. And we want to be a resource and a wealth of these conversations are great, but they're great in the way that if anybody gets a spark from one of these names or one of these pieces of information and it ends up somewhere in a classroom and somebody else is learning it, that actually is that's why we should be talking to each other. Is because, we riff off of each other and we find these. I love this story around, last weekend, we're on stage then the last 48 hours, we're on a stage talking about Black History Month and the origins of it. And it kind of went by me, the part of the history that you just said. We talked a lot about Woodson and, Black History Week and the evolution from there or whatnot. But the celebration of Frederick Douglass prior to that actually is a pivotal piece in the puzzle.
Yeah, and they're contemporaries, right? So it's not even just that Carter G. Woodson is reading about this 20 years later, I'm going to start. They're in the same rooms. It's just hey, we're doing this. We're seeing hey, you know what? Schools need to know more about this. Hey, you know what? We need to expand this. And, it's, and yeah, Mary Church Terrell has, I think she's a, when you talk about names, that's another name that you don't often hear about in the public sphere of, Black women or Black history. But Mary Church Terrell was another one of those pivotal people. You know how Lucy Craft Laney had this tree, where, hey, one of my mentees is Mary McLeod Bethune. One of my lifelong mentees, Mary McLeod Bethune. And we hear about her. We don't hear that much about Lucy Craft Laney. Mary Church Terrell is very similarly, people don't always hear about her. And her philosophy, her work, her organizing skill. That's what, when I would read about her, I'm like, man, she was always part of an organization pushing for something. Always.
Well, and you lead an organization that is building up the pipeline of Black educators. And you've always said to me, we don't just need more Black teachers, we need more conscious Black teachers. And I think the consciousness of Black teachers has to involve the fact that you're more than just a teacher. You're more than just an instructor. If we look back to these women, what you just said, in our Black educational history, they were organizers. They were people that were teaching about not just ABCs and the 3 Rs. They were also teaching about the practice of freedom, the practice of democracy, how the systems work beyond the classroom, right? They were part of communities in a way that wasn't just I'm the teacher and I work in a school or that sort of thing. No, they were educating adults at night about this is what we need to do for our kids and for you and for all of us. They were part of the resistance apparatus, not just a part.
They're part of the resistance apparatus. I love that, because two great examples of that. So many people think Dr. Martin Luther King started the Montgomery bus boycott, not realizing he was invited in. Hey, young man, you have a platform. You have a voice. People are paying attention to you. We want to invite you to come help lead this. But who planted this seed? Who first started? This? Obviously, she was part of an organization, but it was a teacher, Joanne Robinson.
I didn't know this.
So Joanne Robinson is the one that's often credited for initially helping to organize and plant the initial seed. Because, Montgomery bus boycott, it wasn't the one that lasted 380 days or whatever. We know about that. But before that, there were attempts to do it. They would do it for a day. They would organize, and again, before internet, people just organizing after church meetings, knocking on doors, putting out leaflets. Hey, we're going to do a boycott. We're not going to get on the buses, on Monday. Joanne Robinson was a pivotal part of that. After the Montgomery bus boycott, you know what she did? She went back to teaching in the classroom.
Wow.
So this kind of interrupted her
Wow.
teaching, because of,
Yeah.
things were like full blown. She went back, she taught until she
Well, it
retired.
extended her teaching.
Extended her teaching.
Extended
Yeah,
her
yeah.
teaching. And that's, if we could get black educators now reacquainted with what the role used to be
What the role
in the community.
Exactly, Chris. Exactly.
Yeah.
Because we have teachers now, they love their content more than they love kids.
Ooh.
And they're like, oh, I love Shakespeare. I hate these kids I got to teach it to because they love it. But I love Shakespeare. Oh my gosh, this is so, and you know what I mean? And then, like that's their love, where there are others like, well, I love children and I'm going to help them unlock their potential. Like, so for me, when people talk about, when I talk about, Nithamu Sasa, it was like they were using school and education as a lever to make sure we were able to carry on the tradition to fight for our people. And they're like, education is the most important ingredient to all of this. And so when they looked at communication as like, hey, I want our children to be able to communicate effectively, reading, writing, speaking, right? So we had to read. Just imagine, and I think I shared this with you before, like we had a book report and a science report due every month.
Wow.
And that's outside of whatever we read in history class, in literature class, independent book report and science report every month. You figure a school week is about 22 days a month, right? So that means every 22 school days and then plus the weekend. So every 30 days we were working on a book report and a science report that we presented often, and it was like random, like, oh, who's presenting? Imagine doing that from pre-K to 6th grade. So this is why I'm always pushing back on like, don't do homework. I'm like, I never knew a life without homework. Like we were always because learning.
Well, you know what? We're not gonna have this argument right now.
Well, that's why I just
We're
wanted
not
to
gonna have this argument
wanted to-
right now. If you can't teach it in class, what do you mean homework?
But just
no,
imagine.
we pay you to do classwork. You do classwork. Me assigning my child no homework.
But
because
just
you can't
imagine
get it
that
done
in
in the classroom.
Pre-K to 6th grade, all of us, just like what we were absorbing, practicing, speaking, and things like that. But then another person I love, her name comes up a lot during Black History Month, but I think they forget the part that you just said, the resistance apparatus, Ida B. Wells. They know about her journalism. Before she was a full-time journalist, she was a full-time teacher.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, she was a classroom teacher, and
Okay.
she ended up getting fired, of course, because she was fighting for justice, right? She was same way with Septima Clark. Her name comes up sometimes, right?
Yeah.
And they know her work with Martin Luther King, but before that, she was a teacher fighting for justice.
Yeah.
And
Actually,
so-
let's stop there for a second because I did not say this. This was the last era. So we talked about the antebellum. No, let's go all the way back. So we talked about the antebellum era, and that was information you can find on that. You can find from Heather Williams' book, Self-Taught, and that's really about fugitive pedagogy, learning as a stolen art, like as a stealing in education. Then Reconstruction was the Charlotte Fortin era that we can look at, bring her name into the room for that era. Jim Crow is the Mary McLeod Bethune era, where you can use her as a pivotal point to teach from. And then during the Civil Rights era, this is Septima Clark. In the Civil Rights era, and she did a lot around voter mobilization and voting and that sort of stuff, and citizenship schools, right? So, we talked about fugitive schools in antebellum, and this was people teaching in, underneath trees and in fields and, in the woods. And then, we talk about public schools during Reconstruction, because that was very much a black idea, was creating tax-funded universal education through government schooling. So that's the development of black school and school just in general from that era. And then the lab schools, that's what Mary McLeod Bethune brought onto the table, was the lab schools. So we're not just talking about education here, we're talking about the institutions that they're building during the different times. And then I think the icing on all of that cake is citizenship schools and Septima Clark during the Civil Rights era, right? So now we've just seen the evolution in all those different eras of where our schools come from, but there's a missing piece in that. The citizenship schools part of this we done lopped off. School reform since 2000 has really gone hard on the math, the reading, not so much on science, not so much on history or social studies, definitely not so much on democracy studies. So what we're missing is a big piece of what came out of freedom schools and citizenship schools and schools that were not necessarily publicly funded, but schools that they were community schools and community-based, meant for rounding us out, right? There's a lot to educating us as Black people. This citizenship schools part of it that Dr. Clark is, I don't know if she's Dr. Fatima Clark for sure, brought to the table is very important. Anything you want to say about her? Because those are all the eras that I wanted to get through with the name. So anything you want to say about her?
Yeah, from what I recollect, Fatima Clark she was teaching in South Carolina. When she ended up, she was, I think the reason she got fired is because she was demanding equal pay for Black teachers and white teachers. And we already know, the history of that and, Brown versus Board. And once they were hiring you, you're teaching the same amount, more credentialed, less pay. But and I think at that time, many folks, if you joined the NAACP, you were fired because you were out. And so not only was she part of the NAACP and she's fighting for equal pay, they got her out of there. Dr. Martin Luther King invited her because of her work. Like, hey, can you help us teach a class? Like, we're bringing citizens. That's a lot of times, in these movements, a lot of times the people are like citizens. They're like, hey, I'm a, and at that time, hey, I'm a maid or I'm a driver or I'm working in a factory. And so he's like, hey, I want to have classes. And so she was a part of that. Rosa Parks was one of the students who took her class. Not a student as in like a child, but they would have these workshops, and Rosa Parks participated in these workshops.
Okay, let me just stop here because I get excited about some of these things, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. But,
no.
But you raised Rosa Parks. She's also one of the pivotal figures that will come up in Black History Month, and since it's Women's History Month, let's put her in this context of March, not February. Mm-hmm. If we put her in the context of March, her story is told so dumbly, so stupidly, so narrowly. She was tired. Yeah. She didn't sit down. So she started something from not sitting down because she was tired. Long before Rosa Parks was the person who was chosen to be the one to test that law, the laws of segregation, in a very organized fashion. It wasn't just that she was tired on one day or whatever. Give me a break with that nonsense. Before any of that, though, I just want to tell you a story about a young Black woman who's walking home from church, and a carload of white boys drives up, kidnaps her, takes her out to the forest, abuses her and attacks her and assaults her, and then drops her back off where they picked her up from, and then that's that. The police come to investigate this, and they immediately know who the group of white boys were. Instead of arresting the white boys, they send representatives of the white community to this woman and her husband and say, we'll give you $500 if you just will shut up about this and let it be. I guess there were some white boys in there that were notable. The husband said, hell no, we want justice. And they looked at him and they said, nigga, exact words, nigga, what do you think that nigga is worth? Talking about his wife. You think she's worth more than $500, right? Type of thing. Of course, he kept pushing it. They made phone calls to the NAACP, and the person who picked up the phone was Rosa Parks. And the reason she picked up the phone was she was the NAACP's chief investigator of sexual assaults that were happening against Black women across the American South. So whereas someone over here was keeping track of the lynchings of Black men, someone over here was keeping track of the large number of white-on-Black sexual assaults against Black women across the American South. And that was before the other issues that they took up. This was a primary issue, and the person who was the chief investigator keeping all of the records on that was Rosa Parks, right? And the way that we know about how many sexual assaults there were across the South is because of people like Rosa Parks. So in the context of February, we can talk about her as somebody who didn't sit down because she was tired. in the context of March, Women's History Month, we better pull her up as one of the people that was educated and disciplined and organized and an investigator of a system of things that were happening that people didn't even know. They knew it, but they just didn't have the records to prove how many of these were happening. There were no cell phones. There was no internet. There was no Twitter. There was none of that. And yet you have a phone call being picked up by Rosa Parks from the story that I just told you all. I don't know if you can teach her. I don't know, Sharif, can you teach that in a classroom? I mean, that's
absolutely.
Story.
I mean,
I mean,
they don't want you to teach it, but I think it's important to teach it. Like, again, what's her genealogy? Like what her and her husband, Rosa Parks, were doing, beforehand. Like, what happened afterwards? And because the story doesn't end with the Montgomery bus boycott, right? Like, her work in Detroit, her conversations with the Panthers, her understanding of Malcolm X and his teacher, like all of that. Like she's part of this. We got to be careful about not flattening these people and telling one page of their entire story. Right. Like, and so like, I think that's a part of it. So like raising up, like she was part of investigating. So again, the courage to investigate, just like investigating lynching back then. I mean, investigating corruption in policing and white supremacy is always going to be dangerous, but when we talk about like these times, you're like, driving in the deep South to remote places, rural areas where the sheriff is the mayor and Joe Bob's cousin and all the stuff, but still doing the work.
Actually, I didn't mean to go on a tangent, but I forgot that I had written something about her too, because you mentioned her later life. She didn't just stop, right?
Yeah, it didn't just, that was the that was the end. That's why I mentioned about Joanne Robinson. She returned to the classroom after, like their lives continued, their work, their activism, the leadership.
Actually, I forgot that I had written about this. She actually was one of the first people to get, after the charter school laws passed, she had one of the first plans for a charter school in Detroit, and she got a charter. And I don't think people know that.
That's probably why the NAACP ended up kicking her out or something, or not. Like, wait a minute, this woman had to, democracy, blah, blah, blah. She had to run and I think lose to lead the NAACP in the Detroit chapter or something, like something crazy. It's been a long time since I read that, but like it was, I may have some about it wrong, but there was some kind of controversy where they were just like, nah, we ain't feeling you, Rosa Parks.
Which, is really crazy, too, when you think about it, because there's a story about her that so many of our people died without money, right? Yeah. And it came out later that the founder of Little Caesars, who's from Detroit, actually was paying her rent all the way up until she passed away. And you have to ask yourself, how the hell is that possible? Like one of our key notable figures who gave so much, how are they passing away in obscurity without money?
Some people in her same era did a whole lot less and ended up millionaires.
Right. Well, they probably ended up millionaires because they weren't pushing the boundaries that she was pushing, right? Like that is how you make it, right? So-called how you make it. All right. Well, I wanted to make sure, let me see. I just want to tell everybody listening and watching, please share this show, click like it, subscribe to us. But also, we will be amassing the notes for each of the shows. So when we put the shows up, you hear me referencing that we have show notes and we have more detailed information than what we're talking about here. So in our notes for this week, if you want them, please reach out to me. You can reach me, chris@citizenstewart.com is my email address that you can catch me always, chris@citizenstewart.com. And I will email you what we're looking at, what we have here. It might be useful as a resource for things that can be taught in your classroom, names that you could put into the record so that kids learn more than just the 4 or 5 people. And if you're interested in that for March, please reach out to me. So I just wanted to quickly add some other people. Mary Smith Peake, who was alive from 1823 to 1862. Mary Peake was born free in Virginia to free black parents. She was secretly teaching enslaved and free black people to read and write, an act that was outlawed after Nat Turner's rebellion in 1831. In the fall of 1861, she became the first black teacher hired by the American Missionary Association, which we talked about earlier, teaching in formerly enslaved people, so-called contrabands, under live oak trees in Hampton, Virginia. The first tree that she did that later became the site of the first Southern reading of the Emancipation Proclamation, which is now called the Emancipation Oak, as the name of the very tree that you could go and look up now. Jane DeVoe, who was alive from 1810 to 1885, she's another storied person you should go look up. Excuse me. She also secretly taught people at her home on Price Street, disguising the school to evade the authorities. Imagine that you have to actually do things under the cover of like, oh, we're going to teach people in the private. How crazy is that? I can't tell you everything about her right now because we don't have time, but please look up Jane DeVoe because it's a good, interesting story. Charlotte Fortin, who we talked about earlier today. Please bring her name into your classroom. 1837 to 1914, those are the years that she was alive. We talked about her already. She later moved to Washington, D.C., even though Sharif wants to put everybody in Philadelphia. But Charlotte Fortin Grimke, she was an abolitionist, an educator, a writer, a translator, and women's rights activist, prominent from a black family in Philadelphia. She became the first African-American to graduate from Salem's state class of 1856. Please go look her up, bring her into your classroom. I could keep going on and on, but I'm not going to read you a whole list. I can send you the list, but Susan King Taylor is somebody to look up. Pull her into your room. Fanny Jackson Chopin, bring her in. We talked about Lucy Craft Laney. Please bring her in. This is a lineage. Anna Julia Cooper.
AJC.
Please look her up. Don't tell me she's from Billy Brown. Just don't do it because she's not probably. Nanny Helen Burroughs, Mary Church Terrell, we've talked about her a little bit, Satima Clark, Mamie Phillips Clark, Constant Baker Motley. Look all these people up, and I have more, so if you reach out to me. But I do want to end, and we could take a few minutes here. I said this earlier that when we look at this genealogy, there's going to be this black space, this kind of, this dark space, I should say, where we go dark. We don't understand between some of the last of these very storied people that I just mentioned and today. Like what happened in between there. The only thing that we're going to have a plot point on is probably Martha Collins in Chicago in the 1970s. And then we get to now. And maybe along the way we pick up men instead of the black women educators who are running everything. We'll have the Harlem's Children's Harlem Zone and that type of stuff, whatever, as notable plot points. But we don't really talk about black women who are still running things. I want to write a piece, and I'm going to do it this week, about notable black women in black education who have been key to my development as an educationist, as a black education advocate and activist, as a writer, speaker, podcaster on these issues. I told you a story, Sharif, before we started, and I want you to tell some stories about any of the folks that you want to bring, names you want to bring in the room today, so that we're not missing people. But in my own life, within the last month to 6 months or so, if I looked at my calendar, I've talked to Kaya Henderson and Janice Jackson and Mia Howard and Frances Misano, Natasha Trivers. I could go down to this, Ebony Lee, Patricia Brantley, who runs an amazing school, Kimberly, I'm going to forget her last name, in St. Louis, who runs Believe Academy, both in St. Louis and Indiana. There's just my world is populated with all these black women who are holding it together and doing, keeping the fire alive on excellence in education for us. They believe in us. They know that our minds are elastic and flexible, and I'm amazed and blessed by the number of these women. I'm forgetting so many names right now that are keeping hope alive for all of us. And at a very high level, Denise Forte at EdTrust is one of the few people that has still kept her courage in saying what she needs to say at a moment when all of DEI is being under attack or whatnot. They are holding this stuff down, right? Jay Artist Wright, who's running Freedom to Choose Schools, and Janelle, who's on her board, who leads the Black Women's Education Forum, who are building micro schools, Black micro schools led by women. Isis Span, who has created an entire a curriculum for young Black people, and also for people that want to start micro schools. Man, I could keep going. They're not going to be getting their due, their justice right now, right? So I'm sorry, that's my excitement. I could keep going. I mentioned Kelly Seaton, but you've got other people in your network.
Oh man, it's so many. And this reminds me, when people sometimes don't realize, like 60-something% of the Black Panther Party were Black women, right? I would say in the educational space, 90-something%. The ones who are like, starting organizations, supporting organizations, leading the work from the grassroots to the treetops, as they say. They're like just pivotal Black women, in this space. And so whether it's like, as I mentioned, Yvonne Savior, who just went to dinner with her, because I'm still drawing for, not only was she my coach as a teacher, she's later my coach as a principal, and she just stayed as to be my coach in my life.
Huh? She put up with you?
She kept putting up with me. The patience that this woman has, and the brilliance and the wisdom that, just keep wanting to draw from, I don't know what percentage in the Center for Black Educated Development. We're about like 20 odd people. 15 are women, and are just like, their talent, their brilliance, their patience, but at the end of the day, their servant leadership orientation. Serving the people, serving the community, making sure Freedom Schools is the best experiences these young folks can have. I'm going to send, we talking about AJC, I'm going to send a video that Anshere Hines, who wrote our curriculum, that's half named after a Black woman, Caroline LeCount, so it's the LeCount Cato. So that was a couple. That was a power couple. Mm-hmm. Y'all with Jay-Z and Beyonce, I'm with Cato and LeCount.
Don't start
it. But it's so not only within the organization, but a lot of the names that you just named, like just how when we first started, like the Dr. Heather Hardings and Akaya Henderson, right?
I just talked to Heather yesterday, Dr. Harding, and she's on that list of people. Like, I just talked to her yesterday, and they each have done so much, but if you met them in person, you wouldn't know it.
They're so just like, they're just people. When you center humanity and you have that, like, I do believe there's a spiritual depth for people that, at least I gravitate to. There's such a spiritual depth to them, where it's not about the ego, it's about humanity. It's about God and serving his creation. Like when that kind of thing is centered in your intention, it shows. Like it literally shows.
I'm going to make up a word though here, because I need to think about this and write about this a little bit.
Language is always evolving, bro. Do your thing.
Yes. Well, I think they have mastered the art of auntyism, because you don't have to be their child for them to feel that you're their family. And when I think about, and I just, I was talking about Kimberly Neal. I was messing up her name. Her last name is Neal Branham. I know her as Kimberly Neal. She leads Believe Academy in those two places, St. Louis and in Indianapolis. And if you look at the world that she constructed for those kids, in the same way, if you look at the place, when I went to Dr. Nina Gilbert's student center that she set up for students, it was in the same building of the hotel that I just stayed in Atlanta this week. When I visited, I told her when I left, I was like, what's so crazy about this space is when you walk in, 100% that it was designed by somebody who loves us. You can just tell. You can just look at it. And that is black belt auntyism, right? If you look at the way that she has crafted a world and a space for those Morehouse men, those young men who she adores and who adore her, and who she has created a learning space for, where they feel like, how else would I be except for excellent? What else would I be except for excellence? There's just like a foregone conclusion. Of course I'm excellent.
Listen, and just, just being with her this past week, I love watching people work in their space, because so often, like, we're in these curated spaces, you're in a panel, you're in a radio show, you're in, but like when you just see people in their community, right? And so I'm following Dr. Gilbert and seeing Morehouse men who aren't in her program coming up to her like, hey, I want to come join. Hey, I want to take a class. Hey, how do I sign up? How do I, right? Because their friend experienced something, and it's the same thing that Dr. Martin Ryder told me about teaching. One of the things that I tried, he's like, even if you don't teach them, if you do well by your students, their friends are going to know. And you're going to become their mentor just because, because of the relationship, the experience that their friend has. Because they also know when their friends have horrible experiences in classrooms. And that's what that reminded me of. I was like, that's what Dr. Martin Ryder was talking about. But I was seeing that, but it was like this fishbowl. Because I'm literally seeing it happen where they didn't know her. They were just, but they got to see her. And she was like this rock star. They're like, oh, I want to join the class. Hey, I'm thinking about becoming a teacher. Can I join your program? Just like, this small school of 3,000 men, young men. But here she is. And listen, our HBCUs, you got to start putting educator prep back in your schools. You got to have teacher colleges. Like, to me, that's, and I know they're underfunded. I know, but we've always been, and we still centered making sure that our students had the best teachers possible.
Well, getting rid of those programs is not, in my mind, someone can argue with me and we can bring them on. It's not a financial decision. It's a decision when you start chasing things like STEM and everything else, and you don't really value the importance of, like, very short-sighted. Dillard University in New Orleans, one of the things that I will never forget is teachers. What's that?
I said, like, you don't need STEM teachers. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, like, who's going to teach it? And that Dillard put out a lot of Black New Orleans teachers. Like, that's where they came from. And so when you have a college like that, university like that, give up the teaching program, it's crazy to me. But anyways, you're trying to get more Black men into the classroom. The majority of our Black teachers, who are few, are Black women right now, which they're holding it down for us. But it's the Dr. Gilberts of the world who are she's creating a space where Black men feel valued. And I just was in that space, and I met 3 Black men that are going to teach. These are talented Black men who were going to do something else. One thought he was going to be a doctor, an optometrist, and somehow got bit by the teaching bug and wants to become an educator, a Black educator, and has a whole reasoning for doing it. And I thought, man, you're a unicorn, first of all. Like, we need to figure out what got you here. But of course, he's in the space that she created for these young men to figure out what they want to be in life or whatever. Well, as we close, it's Women's History Month. Last month was Black History Month, and I just say that we should combine the two, make it Black Women's History Month, so that we don't keep forgetting these names. I mentioned so many of them. I would love you to go see Kimberly Neal's school. I'd love you to go see Patricia Brantley's school, Natasha James. I would love you to talk to her about what her educational vision is. I would love for you to talk to Ebony Lee about what she sees that's possible for Black excellence in a lot of the schools. Tori runs a school in Atlanta, is one of the amazing schools in Atlanta. I visited a school run by a Black woman called SACA, the South Atlanta Christian Academy, where they're growing their own food, and the community can come and get any of that food, and they're winning state championships and everything from debate to sports and whatever. And it's a small Black school run by a Black woman, right? I would love for you to go visit any of the schools that, like, Frances Masano is seeding, or the districts that she's seeding through the New Schools Venture Fund, or to talk to Mia Howard about the work that they're doing. I'd love you to talk to, I mentioned Kaya Henderson and Janice Jackson earlier, about what they're doing for young people, to make sure that young people are the voice that they are the voice, because everything has started, all the civil rights movement, everything we ever talked about, whatever, has come from an appreciation of young people being able to lead from the front. And that's what Kaya is doing now, right? She's got a global organization that she's doing that with, right? I got a text message on the way back from Mimi, from your team, just checking in to see how things went. And she's another one where I think to myself, we just do not actually, we don't pay attention to the level and the caliber of people that we have in our networks that are working for us, right? I sent her a text message saying, every time I interact with you guys, it's always awesome. She just checking in with me to see how it went. And my only response to her was, anytime I interact with you guys, it's always good. It's just always good. Y'all hold things down and organize things in such a way to where it's a joy to be there and just to do these things. So that's my accolades. I'll leave it to you to have the final word, brother.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it stretches so deeply. You met, several of these folks, when you think, I'm laughing because, like Mama Yasmin, who you met she's one of the Black Panther Party members, in the 70s, still doing the work, like literally still doing the work, organizing, thinking about the political prisoners, thinking about education, thinking about her, her family and her extended family, the Cubs. You have Dr. Aisha Imani here in Philadelphia, who, Philly 7th Ward just recognized as Black Educator Hall of Famer. She was, a funny thing is she was my neighbor as a child. Like she lived, literally next door. And so she looked at my mother as her mentor. I look at her as my mentor, and just her work to start schools, create schools, be part of the Philadelphia Freedom Schools movement, so like when we think about like our Freedom School Literacy Academy and we look at the genealogy of it, you can't skip over Dr. Aisha Imani and the work she and her team, and obviously, Dr. Carr and Dana King and others, all the way to like, folks who are like philanthropists who I met, maybe a couple years ago, Liz Thompson out of Chicago. And like the amount of people that her and her husband are supporting, are loving on, are lifting up, it's like, you can't even count, right? Because every door opens up 1,000 other doors, so to speak, right? And so every time she opens and you're opening this, again, that river, that Nile River that just keeps passing up nutrients all the way upstream is is just incredible, whether there's so many. Mama Renee, Mama Renee was my teacher, but her son is a teacher now. And we're collaborating to hold on to some of the freedom songs we learned that our teachers like Mama Kamara and Baba Jehudi and others taught us freedom songs, like, as children. So when you grow up, learning songs like, which side are you on, boy? Which side are you on? I'm on the freedom side. Now, Malcolm was a freedom fighter who taught us how to fight. Right. And we're going to fight all day and night, and we're going to do it right.
See, that's how they messed y'all up. They got y'all singing.
That's how they got it. Listen, when I'm down, I sing that song to myself today. 50 years later, I sing that song to myself today because Mama Samira and Mama Kamara and others had Freedom Now Choir, and we would sing that. So when I need to feel regrounded, when I'm feeling like beaten down, a Black woman taught me some words to soothe myself and that's to beautiful. Tell myself to get up. Get up, El Mekki, get up.
I will have us in there. We started with Mama El Mekki being an unquestionably, consistently believer in us, believer in what so even when we don't believe it ourselves, you come and cross people like Mama El Mekki, where it's a foregone conclusion that you are good. You're not going to get any other message. You are intelligent. You are capable. You are the reason for being, right? And it's funny because on the stage at BMEC last year, your organization's annual thing that they do, it wasn't last year, It's the previous one. We had Angela Davis on the stage and Erica Huggins. And when you meet them in person, that's also the energy that they give. They don't give the energy of, I'm an icon, I'm such and such, whatever. You get this, young brother, this is your time. Don't ask me to recount everything that I'm doing. I'm interested in you and you doing the next thing, whatever. That's the spirit that we don't do justice to, because they are so humble about what they are contributing to our lives and to our souls. So hopefully this show and this episode and others that we will do, and for all the educators listening who will bring into their classrooms these names and these lessons, maybe we will do some justice to them because we forget so much about what they give us. They give us the inspiration to know we're good and to keep going. So for everybody listening and watching, this has been another episode of Freedom Friday, and you're still not free, but hopefully you're freer after this hour with Sharif El Mekki and me. We'll catch you on the next show. Peace.